Good evening, everybody. The irony is not lost on me that I've been so terribly anxious in preparing this talk about anxiety that I've actually gotten to try out a lot of the strategies that I'm going to be suggesting this evening. So, as Richard mentioned, I think most of us are familiar with the feeling of worry and nervousness and unease about things. We're so often nervous about new things, like many people would be starting a new class or new school this year. You might be going to job interviews, or we worry about things like money, relationships, exams that we've got to write. We might be apprehensive about the future. What does it hold for us? Our health. Many things make us feel uncomfortable and anxious. But when we talk about anxiety in the mental health sphere, so myself as a psychiatrist, we look at the anxiety response as being a combination of things. There is the cognitive aspect of it, so that's what's going on in your mind. That's that excessive, uncontrollable worrying, thinking that feeling that something bad is going to happen, that difficulty concentrating and just being able to think about the one thing. I'm thinking about how I felt this week. All I could think about was this talk and what I wanted to say and how was I going to say it, and I'd find my concentration drifting off when I'm in a meeting and I'm starting to think about something else because that's on my mind the whole time. Then there's the physical aspects of anxiety. So that's that rapid heartbeat. I can tell you exactly now what it feels like. Heartbeat. I feel like I'm breathing up the top of my lungs here. My stomach feels so slightly off. Those physical symptoms, that's the physiological symptoms of anxiety. And then there's also the behavioral component of anxiety. So what anxiety does, because it's a really uncomfortable feeling, is we like to avoid anxiety. So sometimes that will inspire us to go and sit down and prepare the talk that we need to be giving. But it might also mean that we open our phone and look on Instagram and just doom scroll, because that distracts us from those feelings. Avoidance in children might look like school refusal, won't go to school, or separation anxiety, not wanting to be apart from mom and dad. Sometimes being anxious makes you really irritable and short-tempered and tetchy. Some people might try to numb their feelings of anxiety by binge eating or just comfort eating or drinking or taking medication. So these are the components of the anxiety response, which is really quite unpleasant. So why on earth do we have this anxiety response? And would you be surprised if I told you that it's really a necessary response and that it's actually a God-given response which is designed to protect us and to keep us safe? So to just sort of explain briefly the physiology behind this, I'm going to take you on a trip to the savannah. Now that looks really peaceful and calm. Sun is shining, grazing, beautiful. But a second later, this could be the zebra's reality. That zebra needs to go from grazing peacefully to being in a race for its life. Surviving this lion attack is dependent on this zebra being able to escape, outrun, outlast, endure longer than that lion can, and then to be able to recover from any injuries that it sustains during that fight. So God in his wisdom has given us what is called the autonomic nervous system. So without getting too deep into things, the autonomic nervous system automatically controls our physiology. And it's in two divisions. There's a parasympathetic and a sympathetic nervous system. The parasympathetic nervous system, when that one is sort of activated, that's the rest and digest stage. So heart rate is slow, breathing is relaxed, diaphragmatic breathing, digestive enzymes are at work, there's peristalsis in the gut, so the gut is moving nicely, all is good. But enter the lion, and suddenly you flip over to the sympathetic branch of the autonomic nervous system. And this is the traditional fight, flight, or freeze response. So there will be almost instantaneous changes in the physiology of the zebra. The pupils will dilate to allow more light in. So especially in low light conditions, that the vision, the animal's vision can be as acute as possible. The saliva will stop flowing, so there will be like a dry mouth. Heart rate and blood pressure will spike. So the heart rate goes up to try and make sure that there's enough circulating blood to provide oxygen and nutrients to the muscles, which now need to be able to run. Similarly, the blood vessels in the skin may constrict and force blood out of the skin and into the muscles. And so that gives you that sensation of going cold, if that's ever happened to you when you get a really big fright. Similarly, the blood is pumped out of the digestive system and into the muscles. And so peristalsis, or the movement of the gut, stops, and that might give you that sort of sick feeling or that feeling like you need to go to the loo. But all of that is to enable, as I said, the zebra to escape. So this is what's called the fear response. Now, anxiety is that same fear response, that same activation of the autonomic nervous system, but where fear sees a threat, there is an actual threat, anxiety imagines one. So it's that same fight or flight response, but by merely thinking about something that could go wrong. The fight or flight response is meant to be fairly short-lived. It's meant to be escaping some kind of life-threatening event. But when there is anxiety or ongoing stress, another layer of the nervous system can be activated, and that's called the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis, or the HPA axis. And then stress hormones like cortisol can be released. And the problem with long-term cortisol exposure is that it affects lots of different body systems, so it increases your risk for having high blood pressure and cardiovascular disease. It increases your risk for having immune disorders, even cancers. So it's important that we are able to manage anxiety. While it is a functional thing to be anxious, anxiety is probably the only thing that got me to prepare tonight's talk. So it's functional. It helps us to do things, but it's being able to balance that and for it to be healthy anxiety and rather than anxiety disorder. So I've just put up a list of anxiety disorders. These are what, as a psychiatrist, what I will be looking for and trying to diagnose. So, for example, generalized anxiety, agoraphobia, that's the fear of open spaces or places where it may be difficult for you to get help. You get specific phobias. You've probably heard of things like claustrophobia, which is the fear of small spaces. You get social anxiety, separation anxiety. And then there are anxiety disorders which can be caused by medication or by using substances. And anxiety disorders which can be caused by medical conditions. So there's a whole list of anxiety disorders, but I've just told you that anxiety is normal and good. But now I'm telling you there's a whole lot of anxiety disorders. How are we going to differentiate between what's normal and good? And there isn't a test. There is unfortunately not a blood test. There's not a scan or an MRI or something that we can send for. So it takes some assessment to decide whether an anxiety disorder is abnormal or not. So anxiety is on a spectrum. Okay, I'm going to give you an example. How does that make you feel? If you walk into the bathroom and that is in your basin, what do? Are you the person who grabs a tissue and takes it and frees it out the window? Are you the person who uses that trusty paper and cup technique where you slide the paper, put the cup over, slide the paper under? Are you the person who empties a can of doom on the spider and washes it down the drain? I'm that one if I'm home alone. If I'm home with my son, I just call my son. He's person number one that can just take them outside. But then there are people who won't even go into a garden shed because they've seen a spider web there. And then there are people who won't even leave the house and will be closing all the cracks with silicone and with grout and wearing protective clothing. So anxiety is along a spectrum. Some of anxiety is our temperament. You may recognize in your own children that you have a child who tends to be more anxious than the other one. Their temperament is they don't like new things. They like to be in their safe environments. So some of it is temperament. But I think just in rough guidelines, anxiety that is excessive, so out of proportion to the stressor and difficult to control, and then anxiety that actually impacts your functioning becomes an anxiety disorder. So, personal example, I have a phobia for praying mantises. All very cute, but you cannot tell me that that doesn't look like something from a horror film. Can you see those spines there? So my phobia came from when I was little. My baby brother got, I don't know what you would call it, pinched or bitten or I don't know what by one of these things, and it actually drew blood. So I realized that this is excessive to be afraid of praying mantises, but it doesn't affect my functioning, fortunately, because I do not work in insect enclosure, and fortunately they are very few and far between. So while it is a phobia, I don't require any treatment for that, and I just live with it. So part of deciding whether an anxiety is a disorder is to look at how it impacts on your functioning. So a normal anxiety reaction is usually to a specific situation. So I know when I leave tonight, I will no longer be anxious. But when the anxiety comes out of nowhere and is not very specific to anything, and you just have that low-grade anxiety feeling, or it's ongoing and it just keeps ongoing for months and weeks, years even, and if it interferes with daily functioning and it's very difficult to control or to manage, and if it starts beginning to really affect your physical functioning or culminating in panic attacks, then that may be something that needs to be looked at. So although anxiety disorders are very common, general anxiety is pretty much universal. So what I thought we would do tonight in terms of looking at strategies for anxiety is I'm mostly going to be talking about strategies for everyday anxiety. These same strategies would be helpful in anxiety disorders, but would not necessarily be adequate treatment for them. I'm also going to try, so what I've tried to do here is to look for evidence-based, cheap, and easy strategies to manage anxiety. There are a whole lot more. This is definitely not an exhaustive list. And some of these strategies are probably very well known and won't be surprise to you, but some of them might be something interesting and new to you. So when I'm treating anxiety disorders, the type of therapy we recommend is called cognitive behavior therapy. So the premise with cognitive behavior therapy is that what we think affects the way we feel and affects our behavior, and all of those things affect each other. So if I feel anxious, I may have certain thoughts, like I'm anxious, so I'm thinking probably people are going to fall asleep in my talk, or what if I really embarrass myself? What if I say something that's untrue? So I'm thinking these thoughts. They're making me feel more anxious because I'm thinking of every single thing that I can think of that could go wrong. What if there's a power failure? What if there's... So my thoughts are making me feel worse. And then perhaps because I'm feeling worse, I scroll on Instagram or I go and pour myself a very large glass of wine or something. And then that behavior of drinking wine makes me feel more anxious, etc., etc. And so this is a vicious cycle. So in cognitive behavior therapy, we try to intervene in one aspect there to try and break that cycle. So one of the methods we do is looking at thought. So I've mentioned some cognitive distortion. So this is ways in which we think that is not true. So, for example, all or nothing thinking. So if I don't get an A for a test, then I'm a failure. That's not true. Overgeneralization. This generally starts with everybody or always or never. I'm never going to be able to do this. I always get it wrong. That's an overgeneralization. That's not true. Catastrophizing. If I don't get this talk perfectly right tonight, then I'm a failure as a psychiatrist. So those are dramatic examples, but that is the way we do have these automatic thoughts. Mind reading is where I believe I know what you are thinking or how you are feeling about something. Fortune telling is where you feel like you can predict what's going to happen. You know what's going to happen. So part of cognitive behavior therapy, proper cognitive behavior therapy requires a therapist, a trained therapist to do that with you. But for free at home, you can do a cognitive record. So you catch yourself thinking these thoughts and you challenge your thoughts. So you answer yourself, you say, that's not true. The truth is that if I don't give a good talk tonight, my husband will still love me, I'll still have a job, it's not the end of the world. So that's how you would go about trying to catch yourself in these negative thoughts. And if you can change your thoughts, which you are in control of, it will change the way you feel and perhaps the way you behave. Breathing. It's something you're doing anyway, hopefully. So by just adjusting the way you breathe, you can actually trick your body into moving from that sympathetic nervous system overdrive into the parasympathetic state. So like the picture here shows, when you're in the sympathetic fight or flight nervous system state, you've got an increased heart rate and bronchial dilatation, which actually makes you feel like you need to get more air into your lungs. So by slowing down your breathing and making it diaphragmatic breathing, that means using your diaphragm to breathe, so using your stomach, basically letting your stomach go out and in, making your lungs expand that way. By doing that, you can actually bring your own heart rate down, and you can get your lungs to feel like they're normal again. So there's various breathing techniques that you can use. One is called box breathing. So if you imagine a box, you'd count 4 counts to breathe in. You hold your breath for 4 counts, breathe out for 4 counts, hold for 4 counts, and you just repeat that square over and over again. Another method is called 4-7-8, also counting 4 counts to breathe in, hold your breath for 7 counts, and then breathe out for 8 counts. It's really hard when you're anxious. I checked this week. Because we tend to be breathing up here when we're anxious. And so it takes a couple of rounds to be able to get enough air in your lungs to be able to blow out for 8 counts. But it really works really well. And I used my heart rate monitor on my watch to check, and it does. It brings your heart rate down nicely. With children, a very nice way to describe this is to say, blow the butterflies out of your stomach. So the most important thing with the breathing is that your out breath must be longer than your in breath. If that's all you remember, just breathe out really long. So it's very easy to teach children this, and it's a simple thing that you can do anywhere, even at your desk. Another easy way to try and decrease your anxiety or stress levels is to do what's called progressive relaxation. So actually, when you're anxious, you're tensing your muscles to a degree because your body is preparing to run from whatever it is that you're scared of. So you're actually quite tense. And if you tell somebody to relax, they don't actually know what that feels like. So a way to help you to relax is to actually do the opposite. So you tense your muscles as hard as you can till it is painful. Is this ringing? It does feel like it's ringing the whole time. Okay. So you tense your muscles as hard as you can till it's almost painful. And you hold it there for a couple of seconds, and then you release. And you do that progressively. So you kind of start at your feet. Curl your toes in as hard as you can. Feel free to do it now while nobody can see. Curl your toes in as hard as you can, like till you're almost aching in the arch of your foot. Hold, and then relax. And then you point your toes as hard as you can, contracting your calf until it's really, and then relax. And you go up through your whole body. And that is a really easy, simple way to relax. And the more you train your body, what a relaxed state feels like, so you can actually even do what's called conditioning. So if you do this practice, you do it, let's say you do it lying on the floor or whatever, when you do the relaxation, you imagine a scenario where you would be relaxed. So you imagine lying on the beach. You can even say the word beach. And if you practice it often enough, when you are in another situation and you imagine your beach situation, your body will go into that same relaxed state because it's learnt to link those two things together. Sounds far-fetched, but it's true. Another way to manage anxiety is to do what's called grounding. So grounding is not referring to grounding where you put your feet on the ground, but that some people do say that you can connect to the electromagnetic force or whatever, I don't know. But I'm talking about grounding as in bringing you back to the present. So anxiety is often worry about something that hasn't happened yet, it's in the future. And very seldom can we actually do anything about what is coming in the future. So bringing yourself back to the now is very helpful. And so a way to control your thoughts is to give your brain something else to do, to think about. And so what you can do is to follow this 5 senses technique. So you look at 5 things around you. So I keep looking at the flags at the back of the hall, and I've looked at the clock a few times. And so I'm starting to pay attention to the things that are around me. Then you move on to things that you can actually feel. So I can feel the fans, I can feel my shoe buckle, I can feel the remote in my hand, and just become aware of my physical sensations. Then start thinking about things that I'm hearing. So you can see I'm moving from outwards, inwards, to a grounded state. When it comes to smelling and tasting, I find that it's often you need to actually just imagine a taste or a smell, because hopefully there aren't a lot of smells in the environment unless somebody with nice perfume is sitting next to you or something like that, and then something that you can taste. Again, a very useful strategy with children who are anxious because it's quite simple and easy. So you are what you eat, they say. There's an interesting branch of psychiatry coming out called nutritional psychiatry, and there's a big focus on your gut. So your gut is full of bacteria that live in your gut, and they are important. They help you to digest. But you have 100 trillion bacteria in your gut. That is more than the number of stars in the Milky Way. And that is 3 times more than the number of cells you have in your body. So as you sit here, you are more bacteria than you are you. So those bacteria are really, really important. And what determines what bacteria you have in your body is what you eat and what you do with your body, how you exercise, how you care for your body. So we can, in converse, we can actually affect the bacteria in our gut, and those bacteria affect us. what they do, how they digest what we eat, and what they produce affects our nervous system. So it becomes really important that we try to have a healthy diet. Now, I think there's always something that you can improve on your diet, but in general, lower anxiety levels are associated with more fruits and vegetables, with omega-3s, with certain supplements, so micronutrients like selenium, magnesium, those kind of micronutrients, so taking a multivitamin, probiotics, so that's actually trying to give yourself those healthy bacteria. I was toying with whether I should tell you this or not, but I'm going to tell you. It's a bit of a gross experiment, but they took mice that were anxious, and they took a fecal transplant, so a little bit of that mice species, and they implanted it into another group of mice who were not anxious, and they induced anxiety in the other mice. So your gut bacteria potentially, I don't think they've done this in humans yet, thank goodness, but it is possible that the animal model may very well be something that could be transmitted. So you can get anxiety just from your gut, and so your diet is going to be quite important in terms of that. Right, exercise. We all know that exercise is good for you. It's good for your cardiovascular health. It's good for your weight, etc., etc. But regular exercise, in the context of anxiety, regular exercise makes your sympathetic nervous system less active, and your HPA axis, so that sort of more chronic part of your anxiety response, less reactive. Exercise has also been shown to increase brain-derived neurotrophic factor, which is a really important thing that psychiatrists love in the brain because it helps your brain to grow and to repair. And so that's a really fantastic reason why we advocate exercise in all mental health patients. And some exercise also helps you with self-efficacy, so being able to feel like you are able to, you are in control of your body, and you're able to effect change. So particularly, there's quite a bit of research about martial arts. So judo and things can really help with confidence levels. The best results in mental health is with moderate exercise. So I know a lot of anxious marathon runners. Okay. It's more the sort of moderate exercise, and both aerobic and resistance exercise seems to be beneficial. There's even studies that show just plain physical activity. We're not talking about formal exercise, but physical activity, walking to your car, parking further away from the shops, using the stairs instead of the elevator. You've heard all of those things. That can be really beneficial with anxiety. Singing. Singing releases endorphins and a neurotransmitter called oxytocin. Now, oxytocin is a bonding hormone, but it also really just helps with lowering anxiety levels and also depressive symptoms. There's been a lot of research on singing with chronic illnesses even, so with lung conditions, that singing is beneficial. But particularly in the context of anxiety, research, one study found that singers have lower cortisol levels after a single hour of group singing. So cortisol levels taken before singing, cortisol levels taken 1 hour later, and there's a drop in cortisol levels. And particularly group singing seems to lead to an increase both in physiological and psychological well-being. And I have to read you the quote out of the study because I think it's so cool. Group singing can produce satisfying and therapeutic sensations even when the sound produced by the vocal instrument is of mediocre quality. Okay, so it's not dependent on how well you sing, it's just that you sing. Okay, there's even an interesting preliminary study which shows that when you sing in a group, your heart rate sinks with the people around you. How awesome is that? Talk about bonding. So I recommend that you sing in your car, which I've done a lot of this week. If you were here earlier when I arrived, I was blasting music. Have a singing or dance party with your kids. We love singing with our kids. Sing in church. join a choir, whatever it is, sing in the shower. But that is proven to help you with anxiety. Acts of kindness. So an act of kindness is defined as an action that benefits others and makes them happy, but typically involves some cost to the person performing the act. Now, that cost is not necessarily monetary. It may be a cost of time or effort or discomfort. Now, I'm going to get geeky about the acts of kindness because this, I don't know, it really fascinated me. I'm going to give you just a couple of examples. There's so much research on acts of kindness. This research study, it was published in 2022. They had 122 participants, so they were students and community members who presented with anxiety symptoms, and they divided them into 3 groups. They had a group that had to perform acts of kindness. They had to do 3 acts of kindness on 2 days of the week. So in other words, 6 acts per week. The other group had to plan social activities for 2 days of the week. So it was defined as being meeting up with another person for the purpose of enjoyment. And that was the brief. And then the third thing was cognitive reappraisal. So that's back to that CBT where I was telling you about having a thought record, recording your thoughts, and then trying to change your thoughts. So they did this for 5 weeks. At the very beginning, they took measures of depression and anxiety, social connectedness, satisfaction with life, and self-absorption. They did that at baseline, and then completed 5 weeks of the intervention, waited another 5 weeks, and repeated those measures. Acts of kindness outperformed all the other interventions, especially on social connectedness and on self-absorption scale. So self-absorption decreased when you performed acts of kindness. And so part of what anxiety does is it makes you very inward focused, makes you navel gaze, you're constantly worrying about yourself, whereas acts of kindness forces you to look out, to find, to look for things to make other people happy. Different study, they took 999 participants. I don't know what happened to the one, but Jesus cares about that one. But acts of kindness, they had 781 of those 999 were randomized to do acts of kindness. Half of them was to do acts of kindness to other people, and half of them were to do acts of kindness to themselves. And then there was the control group. Participants in the other kindness group showed a decrease in depression and anxiety, while those in the self-kindness group showed worsening symptoms. And the researchers finished their article with the following statement. The self-kindness group reported enjoying their acts of kindness more, but this research suggests that the self-kindness may not be as positive as it feels. So again, like we said earlier, part of anxiety is that navel gazing, it's that looking to self. And so perhaps the focusing on self with the self-kindness actually worsens the anxiety because it exacerbates that inward looking. I'm not saying we should not be kind to ourselves. I think we should be kind to others as well as ourselves. I told you I was getting geeky. Okay, but this is I think the last one for this reason. Yes, okay. For acts of kindness. So this article called The Genomic Impact of Kindness to Self versus Others, a randomized controlled trial. So this study tested whether a 4-week kindness intervention could reduce the expression of a stress-related gene. It's known as the conserved transcriptional response to adversity gene. So this gene gets expressed more in circumstances of stress and anxiety. So they took a community sample of 182 adults, and they asked them, they divided into three groups, and they had, one group had to do 3 kind acts for others on 1 day of the week, and the other group had to do 3 acts for themselves, and the third group had to just make a list of daily activities, just 1 day a week, and that was for 4 weeks. So they tested this gene expression at baseline and then again at 5 weeks later, 5 weeks after the intervention had ended. And the participants recorded descriptions of their act so that they would know exactly what was the kind act that they did, to who it was, whether it was a close friend or whether it was a stranger. And this is what happened to this gene. So the first block there is the control group. So the gene expression actually increased in the control group. In the other kindness group, it dropped. And it also dropped in the self-kindness group. But when they differentiated, when they spread out those people who actually did follow the protocol, did what they were told to do, and those who didn't do what they were told to do, this is going to sound confusing, but those in the self-care group that did not do self-care, they improved. Whereas those in the self-care group who did actually do self-care did not show an improvement. So again, the care for others is where the benefit is in acts of kindness. Now, there are brilliant ideas for acts of kindness, but I'm going to just give you a couple of ideas of things you could do. Just complimenting the first 3 people you talked to today. I had an experience with this where I had a bad day, goodness knows what it was in particular, but it was a bad day, and I rushed to the mall to get something, but I had to pop to the loo quickly first, and I ran in there flustered, and this lady turned from the basin and she said, "Oh my word, I love your shoes." And it was like a switch. I just immediately brightened up and realized this wasn't the worst day in my life. And that was something that the person didn't know me, had no reason to compliment me on my shoes, but it really made a big difference to my life. So that's a really simple, kind thing you can do for somebody else. Send a positive text message. Donate old towels or blankets to an animal shelter. Say hi to the person next to you in the elevator. Leave a note on someone's car telling them how well they parked. Love that. Love that. Take a whiteboard marker and write a message on the mirror for your significant other or a family member. Return a shopping cart for people at the grocery store. Really simple things. But in these research studies, doing 3 of these things on 2 days a week made a significant difference to your anxiety and depression levels. That's astounding to me. But you know what? It's not new. Proverbs says, pleasant words are a honeycomb, sweet to the taste and healthy to the body. It doesn't say who it's healthy for. We assume it's healthy for the other person. But then it says, a kind man benefits himself, but a cruel person brings ruin on himself. A generous person will be enriched. The one who gives a drink of water will receive water. So it's not new, but it's fascinating that it can be such a powerful way to manage anxiety. Gratitude. Gratitude reduces negative thinking because it helps you to focus on the present and to look for things to be positive about. And it can help reduce stress and anxiety. So this is a study that was done with 164 10 to 11-year-olds, so that's like a grade 4, in 4 different primary schools. And they were randomized to 2 groups. They had to do a gratitude diary. One group did a gratitude diary, and one group just wrote about events that happened for 3 weeks. So every day at the end of school, they would have 10 minutes to write in their gratitude diary. And this is the result. Sorry, it doesn't show very well. You'll have to take my word for it. That is the anxiety levels at the start. So that was at T1, which is the start of the study. At T2 is at the end of the 3-week intervention. You can see that the gratitude is the dark line. It had decreased, but it also did in the control group. But you can imagine that these children were probably anxious when they were being told what they needed to do, and the strange lady is coming to interview them at school. So both of them felt better the second time round when they had to do the investigation. But what's interesting is the follow-up later, that the anxiety levels continue to plummet in those who had done the gratitude exercise. They were no longer doing it. They had stopped doing it for a month, but they continued to see improvement, whereas the group who was in the control, their anxiety levels started to go up again. So a really simple thing to do with your children, again, anxious children, is to have a gratitude practice. In our home, we do, at dinner time, we ask about what was the highlight of your day. So that's a really easy way to do it. It doesn't have to be a written thing. But it is something that, if we share gratitudes with each other, we get to experience it again and enjoy each other's highlights as well. Gratitude is the ability to experience life as a gift. It liberates us from the prison of self-preoccupation. So we're back to that navel gazing. Look up, look out. Prayer. This was an interesting one that people have actually done research. This is just one study looking at, they took 63 adults, they recruited them from doctors' offices and from the community, and these were people who presented with anxiety symptoms, and they were divided into two groups. One was a prayer intervention group and the other was a control group. The prayer intervention group, they had a 1-hour prayer session with a lay pastor, so no special qualifications or anything, just somebody who worked in a church, and they prayed for 1 hour a week for 6 weeks. There was no therapy or counseling. There was no physical contact at all between the person who prayed and the person who was being prayed for. It was only prayer. And then after that, at the end of that time period, they then also offered the control group, who had had no intervention, that they could then have the intervention of the prayer sessions. And these were the results. So this is the Hamilton Anxiety Scale. It's a scale that we use to measure the severity of anxiety. So that is the starting point. The group that had prayer, this is the light gray line. The line with the little diamond is the control. And so they started around 24, 25 on the Hamilton Anxiety Scale. So that's moderate to moderate severe anxiety. And then after the intervention, the group that had prayer dropped down below 5, which is remission. So they had no longer had anxiety at the end of the intervention, and they were followed up for another month, and they still remained anxiety-free. The group that is in the control group, there was no change in their anxiety levels. Then they offered for them to have the prayer intervention. 21 out of the 36 opted to have that intervention. And then exactly the same thing happened with their anxiety levels dropped down to a 5. And this was again sustained when they were followed up a month later. So then the researchers decided to see what was happening 1 year later. This was the average of all of those patients' anxiety scores at the very beginning. The average post-treatment, they followed them up at 1 year, and they had remained anxiety-free a year later, after 6 hours of prayer. I've had a personal experience with prayer. When I was writing my final exams for my specialty in psychiatry, I was so anxious. I was out of my skin almost. And I had met a lady at church who I liked, but we weren't close friends or anything. And in my state, I sent her a message and I said, please, could you pray for me? I'm really struggling with anxiety. And she responded immediately and said, I'm coming over. And she came to my house and she prayed with me. And immediately, my anxiety was better. And her and I have continued praying together for 6 years now, I think. Sheila? Yeah. So we try and meet as often as we can. We try for once a week. It's often, there's other things that happen. But I can tell you just in my own life how wonderful it is to have somebody to pray with, to share with. And one of the huge benefits is that we get to have double the number of prayers answered. We've prayed through disappointments, we've prayed through losses, we've prayed through hurt, we've prayed through job changes, and through so many things. And that source of support, just having another human being, but it's more than that. It's about looking up. and looking out. So just to close off as a reminder, the simple strategies I've suggested for a calmer life, and there are a lot more. At cognitive behavior therapy, get a therapist if you need one, but there are some aspects of that you can do for yourself. The way you breathe, practicing relaxation, grounding, coming back to the present, what you eat, exercise, sing in a group, sing in church, acts of kindness, gratitude, and prayer. But what if all of that doesn't work? And as I said to you earlier, these are not treatments for anxiety disorders. They're a way to manage normal anxiety. They're not cures for anxiety. And so if that is not working and you are still struggling to cope and to function, then I think it's time to get professional help. And there are different ways that you can go about doing that. I think this is a very helpful resource. The South African Depression and Anxiety Group has a website. They have toll-free numbers. They have support groups. On their website is lots of pamphlets about anxiety, depression, suicide. There's lots of toll-free numbers that you can call. So that's a really good resource for you to start with. Otherwise, you can go to a counselor or a therapist and try and get some help that way. You may want to speak to your general practitioner or even to your local friendly psychiatrist to help you. Right. Thank you so much.